that this is just a waiting game, and what's happening with all of the, not only the asylum seeker, the stuff, the hotel stuff, but also the grooming gang stuff, and the way the Labour Party is responding to this kind of stuff. It feels like there's all of this stuff is going to blow, and it's going to blow at the polls, and this ridiculous government is going to get blown away.
We just announced a new trade bill with India, going to bring in £4.5 billion. And I'm sorry, there are 1 million foreigners on universal credit that cost £7 billion. So every step forward we're taking, and you wonder why. GP services, every aspect of our life is now affected in some way. The migrant hotel bill could pay for 50,000 new nurses, right?
I'd often hear it said, if we hadn't beat the Nazis and if we hadn't fought fascism and we hadn't won, we'd all be speaking German now. And it was almost as though no further explanation was needed. That would obviously be awful because we would have lost our language, we would have lost our culture, we wouldn't be British anymore. And, it's 2025, okay, we're not speaking German, but increasingly there are people in this country that don't speak English. They speak Hindi, Urdu, other sorts of languages. And there is a sense that our cultural identity is being lost.
And in 2008, 80% of British youth were proud to be British. Today it's only 40%.
Hello and welcome to Newspeak, the New Culture Forum's look at the weekly news. I'm Amy Gallagher, filling in for Peter Whittle, and I'm joined by our usual commentators, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, Senior Fellow of the New Culture Forum and Royal Historian, and Philip Kiszely, Senior Fellow of the New Culture Forum and Cultural Historian. We are actually filming this on VE Day, that's Victory for Europe Day. I observed my 2-minute silence this morning. We're going to be talking about VE Day and reflecting on it later on in the show. But just to begin with, Philip, we've got some locals events coming up, if you wanted to talk us through.
We have indeed. It's been a very, very busy time with locals. I've been travelling up and down the country. I've been on tour, essentially, and I've just had a fabulous time. I was in Liverpool this week, Lincoln and Newcastle the previous weeks. Okay, so later on today, actually, on the Saturday, it's Dorset, an afternoon by the seaside with Ben Habib. Then on the 13th of May, we've got a Salisbury locals meetup. On the 17th, it's Edinburgh. That's their May social. On the 18th, it's the NCF Locals Book Club, which is in London, which I might try and get to, actually, because that sounds brilliant. On the 20th, it's Newcastle for an informal meetup. On the 20th as well, it's Canterbury for an informal meetup there. And on the 28th of May, in Brighton, there's an event there, and I'll be speaking at that. So I think that's going to be the next one I'll be going to. And on the 31st of May, there's Carlisle. That's a talk and a meetup. And on the 1st of June in Sheffield, there's a pub lunch. So there's tons and tons of stuff going on.
Okay, thanks, Philip. Before we focus on VE Day, just wanted to start off with this issue of asylum hotels, that's asylum seekers being held in hotels. To me, it's becoming more and more prominent in people's minds that this is happening because it's just affecting people up and down the country. We had these recent elections where Reform UK did very, very well, and they gained an MP in Runcorn. A big factor for that was that the people of Runcorn were heavily affected by asylum seekers being put in hotels. So to me, this is just becoming an issue that is really boiling people's blood, and it's really driving how people vote, actually. Philip, there's been some recent data that's just come through about the cost of these asylum hotels.
Yeah, I think the cost has tripled, hasn't it, now? It's around about 4 million a day. So it's become completely insane. It's a completely unsustainable model. Well, I say it's a model. It's not a model, is it? It's just utter chaos. People are beginning to see and beginning to equate the cost of asylum seeker hotels with the cost of the NHS and all of the services that we are not getting. People are seeing the kind of treatment that people who are coming over on boats, illegal immigrants, all the rest of it, all of these people are getting, and they're comparing it to the kind of treatment they're getting. We have this two-tier system in which taxpayers are punished, and people who arrived here yesterday and who have no right to actually be here are getting preferential treatment. So everything is completely upside down. But I suppose at the end of the day, it really comes to the money and the fact that this is costing, as I say, triple that it was supposed to cost. And I think there's going to be a situation in which people just absolutely revolt. I mean, we've seen the beginning of what I would call the new era, really. This is the end, because people are seeing the cost of these things, not only the financial cost, but the human cost, the cultural cost, all of that kind of stuff. We're seeing what I would call the end of this uber-liberal era, which has lasted for about 20, 30 years. I'd say it's post-Blair, okay? So we're seeing the end of this, and with reform sweeping to all of those fantastic victories last week, there is going to be change. And it does feel for the first time that this is just a waiting game. And what's happening with all of the, not only the asylum seeker, the stuff, the hotel stuff, but also the grooming gang stuff, and the way the Labour Party is responding to this kind of stuff. It feels like there's all of this stuff is going to blow, and it's going to blow at the polls, and this ridiculous government is going to get blown away. So while it's absolutely terrible in the short to long term, all of this pain, this building up of pressure will actually, I think, will benefit us, and we will get rid of these people.
Yeah, I mean, Labour are apparently going to release a plan next week about how they're going to tackle immigration and issues like this. They've said that one of the key policy points that they're going to announce next week is that they're going to make sure all immigrants can speak English. To me, that's like the bare minimum, you know. And this whole thing of, you know, Keir Starmer came out and said we're going to smash the gangs. They've recently made appeals to the EU to help them with that, and the EU have shut it down, and they Rafe. But what do you think the political response to this is? I mean, like, we're seeing the surge for Reform UK. This issue is affecting people clearly. But what should be the political response?
Well, firstly, it's quite clear that Labour and the Tories are running scared. The Tories facing an existential crisis after the local elections, Reform having 30% in the polls, and a large reason for the success of Reform has been migrant hotels. If you look at the sort of councils they've won, these are people who are living at the coalface of all of this. These are people who every day see groups of young men loitering around city or town centres. Is decimating the tourist industry in these places, because, of course, you can't get a room in a hotel. You know, I've been to Great Yarmouth there, and, you know, you can just see how the tourist industry is declining, not only because people can't stay in hotels and spend money locally, but because they don't feel very comfortable or very safe going to these sorts of places. And this has carried on for years and years. All the warning signs have been there. The alarm bells have been ringing, and Labour and the Tories simply had their head in the sand and refused to address any of this, and now they're paying the price. That's why suddenly the Labour Party is becoming more draconian, and they say they want to close down the hotels and so forth. But what happens when they close down the hotels? They want to put all those people, of course, into private accommodation. And we've also now had the Labour Party saying that the taxpayer is going to pay for landlords to house illegal migrants for 5 years, after which we, the taxpayer, will pay to refurbish their apartments and so forth. You know, meanwhile, you have tens of thousands, millions of people on housing waiting lists who are British-born, who can't get a place because they're taken up by these people who have jumped the queue simply because they've arrived here illegally. It's completely outrageous. The cost of the migrant hotels, as Philip was saying, trebled to £15 billion. It dwarfs the size of the winter fuel allowance cut. And this was one of the things at the doorstep in the local elections, people were linking the two. My gran is freezing, or I'm freezing, and yet these people are now living there's one place in Warwick, the Marriott Warwick, 180 men living there, no women, all their food paid for, nice and cosy, and yet British taxpayers are actually going and suffering. This is the sort of stuff that's really annoying. We just announced a new trade bill with India, going to bring in £4.5 billion. And I'm sorry, there are 1 million foreigners on universal credit that cost £7 billion. So every step forward we're taking to, and you wonder why. GP services, every aspect of our life is now affected in some way. The migrant hotel bill could pay for 50,000 new nurses, right? And so this is what people realize. They can see the decline around them of their public services, and they can see the reason for this happening. That's why you're going to see a great reckoning coming at the next general election, I think.
Hello. Please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you.
And it just, the knock-on effect, you can just talk about the knock-on effect all day. I mean, just at the moment, we've got circa 15,000 foreign criminals at large in our towns and cities, dangerous foreign criminals, you know, and we know about the data, we know about the kinds of crimes that they're committing. They're primarily sex crimes, but it's also drugs, it's gangs and all of that kind of thing. We are importing all of this stuff. We're paying for it in hotels. They're getting a holiday, and now we're putting them in private accommodation. One of the real key issues is that some of these really big companies like Serco are making an absolute fortune out of this. They don't want it to stop. Actually, aspects of the right don't want it to stop, who just see Britain as a shop rather than a home. It's not just the left wing. So it comes down to this idea of people really pushing back, understanding what's going on, seeing the ramifications, and really saying no. And they have to, I know people have no confidence in the system, they have no confidence in democracy, but really any other way is just unthinkable. You really have to use your vote. You really have to vote for reform. It's as simple as that.
Do you think reform will tackle this issue if they were in power? I mean, what are their current policies?
Well, now that they are running all of these councils, they are going to do whatever they can to stop migrant hotels. It's still a government, Westminster issue, but they can do all sorts of things to try to obstruct the national government. They can put injunctions. There are a lot of things that they can do. They can refuse to disperse money, or they can essentially do whatever they can. But of course, they can't stop the government doing what it needs to do. What reform needs to do, this is the policy. I was on LBC with Nick Ferrari today, and I was making these points. You need to shut down all of the hotels, migrant hotels. You need to empty them. You need to get all the migrants out of private accommodation, and you put them in temporary camps, right? If these camps were used in the Second World War, there were Polish refugees, women and children and so forth, who couldn't go back to communist Poland. They'd be killed. So they were housed in these camps for years. They got married there. Our own boys in the British Army, they live in these camps. Now, look, 87% of the migrants who come over the Channel are young men of fighting age. If these camps are good enough for our boys, why on earth aren't they good enough for these people to live in? And once they know that they're not going to, because this is all ultimately about making Britain less attractive than France. You take away the incentive to come here, and you cut off the supply of people. So if they know that they're, and people say, oh, for these barracks and so forth, they closed down a place called Napier Barracks because the bathrooms were filthy and so forth. If you knew the conditions that these people live in their homelands, even what we regard as a filthy bathroom is a luxury. And yet, of course, we're always too goody two-shoes about all of this. And, once they realize they're not going to go to a lovely hotel, they're going to be in a camp in some windswept part of the country, in the Orkneys or whatever, getting processed there, then the message will start to get out. Then you have to clamp down on the, forget the smashing the gangs thing, because you smash a gang, it's like a multi-headed hydra.
Yeah, another one will emerge. Yeah, of course.
You need to clamp down on the underground economy, because people arrive here, they go immediately into the delivery companies, they go to the curry houses. You then clamp down on the rogue landlords who are housing illegal immigrants 10 to a room or whatever, not doing any background checks. Once you clamp down on the reasons people come, they will stop coming.
I think this is detailed work, isn't it? And I say this all the time. This is about reform, sitting in small rooms doing the quiet work of policy and bashing out policy and understanding the mechanisms in which they can make this work, understanding the mechanisms in which they can take on the human rights lawyers. But it's also about governance as well, isn't it? They need structures in their own party to be able to handle the talent, be able to handle the people who can deliver this kind of thing. And I just worry slightly at the moment that they don't have either of those two things. They might be working very quietly on policy, but I'm certain they don't have the governance. In terms of the camps thing, of course, that's always been the case, and not in just this country, in Europe after the war as well. In 1956, my father lived for 2 years in a camp in Rome because he was a refugee. He didn't complain about it, and I'll tell you what, if the bathrooms were dirty, he probably would have cleaned them.
And I do think that this issue is not going to go away. It's going to get worse, and that will be good for reform. I think we're going to see, real big swings in election results, as we did recently. Because I think there's all the considerations about crime and the change that's happening in the culture. But I think people really feel like in their gut a sense of real unfairness, and we don't like unfairness in this country. The idea that somebody could come here, having never paid into the system, and given all of this stuff when somebody who's working like 10 hours a day, maybe they've had their winter fuel allowance taken, they've had their disability benefits just cut. It's really hard to feel any kind of loyalty to the country. And we're thinking of VE Day at the moment. 80 years since the end of the Second World War in Europe. It's 80 years ago people were celebrating their sons and fathers coming home, not living in fear of being bombed, but they were also celebrating freedom and the preservation of British culture. A query whether we still have those things intact. Rafe, you've been covering VE Day and the parades and the celebrations. What is your kind of takeaway, not just in terms of the celebrations, but how it's being thought about more broadly in the culture, and I guess your own personal reflections of VE Day?
Well, VE Day is very important to me. I've been to every single one since 1985, and it's bittersweet in a way, because each decade, of course, the number of veterans reduces. And this was the first year that we don't have a senior member of the royal family who has any memory of the Second World War. We had the Duke of Kent present as a junior, but everybody, the Queen and Prince Philip, they've all gone. So this year it did feel rather like the passing of an era, I have to say. I suspect we'll have 2 more VE days, as we did with World War I to the 100th anniversary. But when I looked at the celebration, there was a noticeable decline, I would think, in knowledge or interest or engagement with VE Day this year compared to even, just 10 years ago. Which I found regrettable. But of course, when I was growing up, World War I was a distant memory. World War II was much more real. Now, of course, World War II is becoming just as much of a distant memory as the Napoleonic Wars, maybe, if you're a teenager today, which is, of course, deeply worrying, because the message of this year's VE Day, when you had the handing over of the torch of peace by a 100-year-old veteran, was, this is not a done deal. You need to keep on fighting for our freedoms. And, of course, we can see what's been happening in Europe as well. The loss of our freedoms, these are things that are sacrosanct, we must fight for. And my overarching thought was, well, actually, we call the veterans of the Second World War the greatest generation. And to what degree would the youth of today stand up to defend Britain or fight for our freedoms and our liberties? And in 2008, 80% of British youth were proud to be British. Today it's only 40%. Which would be a great wake-up call. And of course, a lot of that is because of immigration as well, because there's a much higher preponderance of ethnic minority youth than in the wider population. And we know, for example, that black youth have the lowest levels of pride in Britain. And there's no surprise, because they're constantly taught about that they are the victims of systemic and institutional racism, that, of course, that slavery is the original sin of this country and so forth. And then you have left-wing youth who, of course, are indoctrinated into nihilism and self-loathing rather than love of nation. And so we've basically had a whole generation now who despise Britain more than love it, which is a cause for great concern.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously very glad that the celebrations are happening, and I would definitely encourage anybody to mark the occasion or watch the celebrations. But I do understand why people aren't engaging. I mean, I think that the attack from the kind of the woke left on Britain and our history is awful, but I do understand why some young people are feeling that they aren't patriotic because that they feel that they don't have much of a future here with immigration and with housing and things like that. You can kind of understand why people are sort of checking out, can't you, a bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly sad, isn't it? And Alison Pearson wrote a fantastic article about VE Day 80 today, and she was comparing, well, first of all, she was comparing Churchill to Starmer, this incredible wartime leader with this faceless bureaucrat, and how have we got here? I think the whole post-war era is the story of how we got there. And immediately after that wondrous victory, immediately the whole fabric of our society began to be taken apart with the first New Left of the 1950s, then the counterculture of the 1960s, then the nihilism of the 1970s. So all of that stuff really, I suppose, attacked that contract between the generations, which is what our history kind of stands on, really, the past, the present, and the future. And when I think about that, in many ways, that very Burkean idea, I worry massively, absolutely massively, for all the reasons that Rafe's just said. It's about education, it's about mass immigration, it's about the disintegration of the fabric of society. I worry massively where we're going to be in 10 years' time, because there will be nobody. It won't be a living memory thing anymore, a living memory event, a living history. It will be a document from history. And it will be even more susceptible, even more vulnerable then to abuse, because we won't have those old veterans there, that we won't have that physical presence, which, if you're thinking about history, as you know, is incredibly important. Once that physical presence goes, especially if it's old, frail and brave, once that emotional presence is taken away, then something changes. And I think that change will move very, very quickly from here on in.
And I've had the good fortune recently, but especially in the last 4 days, the 4 days of celebrating VE Day, from the Monday to the Thursday, of meeting several veterans, all of whom over 100. I met some 103, 104 years of age. Half of them very impressively sprightly and mentally alert and physically able to walk, one of them without a stick upstairs and so forth. And I just thought, gosh, what must they think of the world around them? Their friends paid the ultimate sacrifice, as we like to say, gave their todays for our tomorrow. And what have we done with that tomorrow? And what pain must they feel seeing the country that they love so much crumbling around them? And is that the Britain that they fought to defend?
Yeah, I mean, I always think when I was growing up, I'd often hear it said, if we hadn't beat the Nazis and if we hadn't fought fascism and we hadn't won, we'd all be speaking German now. And it was almost as though no further explanation was needed. That would obviously be awful, because we would have lost our language, we would have lost our culture, we wouldn't be British anymore. And, it's 2025, okay, we're not speaking German, but increasingly there are people in this country that don't speak English. They speak Hindi, Urdu, other sorts of languages. And there is a sense that our cultural identity is being lost. And it does get wrapped up as well, Rafe. You're obviously an expert on Churchill. We've seen in the last 10 years a real attack on Churchill from the left, calling him a racist, and then more recently from the right, saying he's the villain, kind of internet historians or pseudo-historians saying he's the real villain of World War II. This is, of course, Victory Day. It's V for victory. It's Churchill's legacy. I guess what are your thoughts on kind of where Churchill stands now, and maybe is that kind of part of why people don't celebrate it so much, or it's not so much in our minds? It feels a bit more subdued this year because we've just had this onslaught from every direction.
Yeah, well, poor Churchill can't win because the left, the woke left, accuse him of being a racist and a warmonger and Bengal famine and all the myths that you get there, terrible imperialist and so forth. And then this new post-truth right, they blame him for all the ills of today. They think for some reason that he is the reason you have mass immigration. This was a man who died in 1965. He left office in the 1950s. How on earth he's responsible for the actions of Tony Blair in the 1990s and then of Boris Johnson, who brought in the Boris wave of immigration from the subcontinent and so forth, beggars belief. I mean, Churchill was I know we want to discuss a story also, don't we?
Yeah, we've got...
We can tie this into it, probably. So Churchill, there's a thing called the Churchill Fellowship, which was founded when he died. The Queen was patron, and now the King is patron. A very distinguished body that gave money to research fellows on different topics. It's now been completely captured, like all institutions have, by woke madmen. And they have now essentially been funding this migration museum. And if you knew and this migration museum is trying to normalize this idea that Britain has always been a nation of immigrants, that it's natural for people to move, that borders are bad. And it's a very insidious organization. It's now been given funding by the Arts Council as well. This is one of the things that you always think the Arts Council behind so much of this. This Museum of Migration is currently in Lewisham Shopping Centre, which is a very depressed part of southeast London, one of the highest non-white populations. And no one goes there, and yet now it's moving into London. Anyway, the point is, it's such a disgrace and dishonor to Churchill's legacy, because despite what people on the extreme post-truth right say, Churchill was deeply opposed to mass immigration. I don't think enough people understand this. In the 1950s, Windrush happened in 1948 under Clement Attlee. Churchill came back to power in the 50s, and he was aghast at how many people were coming from the Caribbean. He was deeply worried that it would cause ethnic and racial tension in this country. He's even said to the Jamaican governor that he didn't want Britain to become a magpie society. And in fact, if you look in the diaries of Harold Macmillan, in one cabinet meeting, Harold Macmillan said with alarm that Churchill thought "Keep Britain White" would be a good campaign slogan. Now, we don't know whether he said that in jest or was serious about it, but there was no post-war prime minister who was more anti-mass immigration than Winston Churchill, and yet he can't win because there are so many people on the right who clearly are uninformed about the man's legacy and everything else, who are blaming him from the fact that we are in the condition that we are today.
Yeah, and this migration museum is really interesting for all of those reasons, but it's also even more sinister because it's not just about the museum. If it was just about the museum, that would be one story, but it's about this migration network that is attached to it, and this is essentially outreach that targets schools and puts the migration narrative front and center of all education. So you have migration, as they say, being normalized as the key, the tenet, the basis of all of the kids' education. So that's incredibly sinister. But again, it's nothing new. We were talking about the Second World War. I remember the centenary for the First World War, and as that slipped out of living memory, as I was saying before, and how the celebrations had changed massively, and it wasn't just about the horror of death and the Somme and all of those, tragedy of all of the flower of our young men dying. No, it was about identity politics. And you see this identity politics for this new era going out into every school and pretty much infecting children's education.
And as I understand it, that this museum, it's pro-immigration, but they're also teaching that, the UK or Britain was built on immigrants, that we have a history of immigration, that it's always been like that.
That's what I'm saying. The front and centre of all their education. It's a completely false narrative.
This is complete rewriting of history.
This is the year zero, right? Now, this is the whole point. Is once you disconnect people from their past, once you denigrate and basically deny someone's past, you say there are no great achievements done exclusively by the British people, all your heroes are bad, but you're essentially brainwashing a nation and creating new foundational myths, right? All societies, all cultures have myths upon which they were founded. And, London was supposed to be founded by Gog and Magog and Brutus of Troy. And they served their purpose because they linked London to the classical world. There's an ideology behind these myths that's always there. And this new one that's being promoted now blatantly by this migration museum, but even by Rishi Sunak, who minted a 50 pence coin saying diversity built Britain is that Britain's always been a nation of immigrants. I'm sorry, it hasn't. Diversity didn't build St Paul's Cathedral. Diversity didn't build the Houses of Parliament. Yes, we had Irish immigrants coming over, but they were still part of the British Isles, and at that point they were part of the United Kingdom. So this idea that somehow the sub-Saharan Africans built Stonehenge, I mean, then the amount of nonsense you get out. But unfortunately, this is seeping into our kids' brains, and you have places like the Museum of Migration that are actively engaged in ideological subversion.
Well, I think that so many young people now don't realise that what we're experiencing now is so unusual and not normal. That it's, really started with Blair, didn't it? Before Blair, we didn't have these huge numbers coming through. And when you mention the veterans, I mean, I'm in my 30s and I feel like the country's dramatically changed from when I was a teenager in terms of the demographic and cultural change. I cannot imagine what it must be like to be someone in their 80s or 90s looking at the country and comparing it to when they were celebrating VE Day. It must just be like an absolute shock.
Well, I think probably what they see is that the national grand narrative being removed. It's almost like filleting the country and removing the spine, isn't it? And when you do that, when you tinker with history, when you remove heritage, when you kind of take away the foundation that our identity is built on, you make us fundamentally unstable. You make the culture fundamentally unstable. That's why they're doing it. It's classic Marxism, isn't it? And you make the people unstable. And it's, as I keep saying, it's just incredibly worrying. How can you look to a future and build a future on what they're trying to make, which is a very unstable past?
That's why, I found it quite hard to reflect on this today on VE Day, because I had I did reflect. I had so much in my mind, because you feel like we're really at a kind of crunch point here. And as you say, in 10 years' time, when we're celebrating the 90th anniversary of VE Day, those veterans won't necessarily be here. And you just wonder you wonder what the country is going to look like, and you wonder if we'll even be celebrating it. So it is quite scary in that respect. And when I see these stories about it was funding for Churchill's Fellowship that got put into this Museum for Migration, you think, is this being done deliberately? Because it almost kind of sums up all of the things we're talking about in that one story. And you think, are they doing this on purpose to kind of demoralise people? Because it seems, you almost read it and you think, oh God, I can't, the symbolism of it. It's kind of hard to get your head around, isn't it? But anyway, did everybody have a good VE Day? I should ask. Did you celebrate, or did you,
Well, I was doing all the commentary for the fly past. Well, I was there for the fly past and the military procession and so forth. And today did a few things as much as I could. I was there.
What about you, Philip?
Well, I've celebrated in my mind, but I've just been working all the time. I've been here, there, and everywhere. Spent it all mostly on trains. Okay.
Well, if anybody did celebrate or did do anything to mark the occasion, let us know in the comments, because we'd be interested to hear. That's all for this week for Newspeak. We are going to go on our extra content for members, where we are going to be discussing Jaguar's woke rebound. We discussed this a couple of months ago, but we've got an update. It's not gone as they've planned, so we're going to discuss that. If you remember, you can join us, but if not, we'll see you next week.
Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture, and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programs, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization. And our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.